So, good morning and a very warm welcome to this Concrete Dialogue 2021, jointly organised by the Concrete Initiative and the Parliament magazine, where we will be discussing the sustainable built environment from a societal perspective. My name is Jackie Davis. I will have the privilege of moderating our discussions this morning, and we're going to have a very interactive debate after some brief opening speeches. Housekeeping point before we start: if you would like to ask our speakers a question, please click on the button on the bottom right of your screen. And could I ask you please to keep your questions or comments brief so I can see at a glance what you want to know and who your question is for. Twitter length or less would be fabulous. And speaking of Twitter, if you would like to tweet out about what you are hearing here, and we do encourage you to do so, please use the hashtag Concrete Dialogue 2021. So, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to give the floor to our host for this event, Sandro Gozzi, MEP, who's a member of the European Parliament's committees on the internal market and consumer protection and on constitutional affairs. He's also involved in the Regional Development Committee. And we're very grateful, Sandro, for your support in organising this event. A warm welcome, and over to you for some opening thoughts, sir.
Thank you, Davis. Jackie, it's my pleasure really to host, and I'm very happy that you invited me to host this event. And I won't miss this opportunity to wish a very happy St. Patrick's Day to all our Irish friends today. I do believe that we are living a moment which I call in Europe, but I would say in the world, and of course including a key sector like the construction sector, a Darwinian moment. A Darwinian moment is not a moment where the strongest wins. It's a moment where you can win, whether you prove your capacity of transformation and your capacity of adaptation. And it is exactly this capacity to adapt to the new circumstances and to transform ourselves to fulfill the new objective that we have to show in the European Union. We have to show in deepening and adapting our single market. And it is clear that the single market and within the single market, the construction sector plays a key role to reach the common objective of the Green New Deal, of circular economy, and also of a more performing and more efficient single market. The construction and building sector has been identified in the European Green Deal and in the Circular Economy Action Plan as one of the key product value chains with enormous potential for sustainable growth and jobs. Let me also, Jackie, recall some key figures. We are talking about a sector which in Europe contributes to the 9% of European GDP, employs 18 million people. Buildings account for approximately 40% of the EU energy consumption and 36% of the Union CO2 emission. Over 75% of the European building stock is considered as energy inefficient, and only 1.2% of the stock is renovated each year. This opens a vast potential for growth, a vast potential for innovative industry, a vast potential especially focusing on renewable energy and energy efficiency gains in Europe, as well as possibility for economic recovery, stronger economic recovery follow COVID-19 pandemic. The building sector has high energy saving potential and potential for the on-site production of renewable energy. We can boost employment and help SMEs contributing with more than 70% of the value added in the EU building sector. So, I mean, really, we have to push for a major renovation wave of both public and private building, and this is something of major importance. And our policy responses should not create an additional burden for the most vulnerable, but on the contrary, we must support them in this transition. We have the responsibility to strike the right balance between our climate objectives and the need for our citizens and for SME to be fully on board with the decarbonization. So the issue of energy efficiency, which I've already recalled, but also the issue of renewable materials, Renewable materials will play an important role in the transition to a climate neutral economy, and we need to further stimulate investment in renewable and bio-based material in buildings. This is the context in which we are operating. These are the common objectives that we have identified as European Union, and current there are many initiatives which are of interest for the sector. I just would like just to mention a few and then I conclude. The revision of the construction product regulation. We have started a discussion, especially in the Single Market Committee. We need to introduce effective, easily enforceable, harmonized construction product, but we also have to promote a more circular approach and to focus also on reuse and recycling of construction product. Second issue is the so-called renovation wave strategy. I'm sure that Sharon Kaff surely will provide some further details on this initiative. I wanted also to recall the Fit for 55 package, which aims to align all sectors, including the building sector, with our increased 2030 climate target. That includes the extension of EU emission trading scheme to the building sector, the introduction of mandatory minimum energy performance when we talk about the energy performance of buildings. So you see a lot of things, a lot of initiatives that we are going to also discuss today. So thank you very much again for this opportunity, and I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Sandro. And as you say, no doubt about the importance both of this moment and of the sector we are discussing today, that Darwinian moment. Can we have that capacity? What do we need to do to ensure that we have the right environment in order to ensure that we can have a sustainable built environment? What are the key drivers of that? Lots to discuss later on, but thank you so much. And we'll delve into some of those initiatives and their implications for the future. Now my pleasure to give the floor to Koen Koppenhuller, who is the Chief Executive of SEM Bureau, to welcome you on behalf of the Concrete Initiative. Koen, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jackie, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to the event on the name of the Concrete Initiative. Thank you all to the hosting MEP, Mr. Gozzi. Thank you very much for your introductory remarks. A special welcome, I would say, also in line with what you just said, to our Irish colleagues and friends who make their day available today. Also for this event, I hope that the day will still hold a lot of green for you today. And I would say with the Irish saying, I understand, wishing you a pot of gold and the joy your heart can hold. So have a nice day today in Ireland. By way of introduction, I would like to unravel a little bit the title we have for our event today, and I will be very short, Jackie, but it's about the sustainable built environment from a societal perspective. And it's society that is relevant here. I mean, in the end, we are businesses in the upstream sector, in the construction sector. We're all engaging on the path to decarbonization, but our end goal is to bring sustainable solutions to the citizen, to the end consumer. It's the end consumer who is looking for comfortable houses, energy efficient houses, and low CO2 houses. The end consumer is looking for a layout of cities where you have green corridors that are mingling with the building infrastructure. And the citizen is also looking for infrastructure that is increasingly linking citizens across Europe. And all of this requires indeed building materials that are low carbon and contribute to carbon neutrality. And that's where our responsibility as a sector lies. But I'm very pleased and happy to see that the Secretary General of Housing Europe could make herself available for the discussion today, because I think that is indeed bringing in that societal view and societal aspect into the discussion. And of course, the bringing to market of these low carbon solutions from our side, from the industry side, also requires a facilitating regulatory framework. And there I'm pleased to also see representatives from the European Parliament, from the European Commission present today, who can discuss that facilitating regulatory framework, including how to define and assess energy efficiency. And I hope that it will also talk about how to activate thermal efficiency, for instance, in buildings, not only looking at buildings as taking from the energy network, but also bringing to the energy network. how we can design our buildings with a view to their later deconstruction. And that's where, in fact, the circular economy comes in, where the recycling and recarbonation effects come in for our sector. And I'm also very happy to have two panelists who will provide us then with practical applications on how buildings can effectively be seen as integrated into the energy system instead of just tapping into it, and where how we can be at the heart of the circular economy approach, where resource efficiency is also very high on the agenda. So this was setting the scene for the discussion today, but back over to you, Jackie, for introducing the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Koen. And as you say, that emphasis on the societal perspective. And one of the issues, how do we encourage people? How do we encourage citizens to renovate their homes, to help contribute to the sustainable built environment? An issue I'd like to discuss with our panel. And also, as you say, we have the Housing Europe representative with us. Also want to discuss how do we foster the take-up of green materials in the construction sector among architects and so on. How do we drive that market? Let me introduce our speakers. They've already been referred to, so but it's my pleasure to introduce the first three members of our panel. Kieran Cuff, MEP, who is a member of the European Parliament's Industry, Research and Energy Committee and rapporteur for the Parliament's report on maximising the energy efficiency potential of the EU's building stock. He has a lot of experience in urban regeneration in Dublin, so it's great to have you with us, Kieran, and may I add my happy St. Paddy's Day wishes to you. Josephina Lindblom, who is responsible for work on sustainable buildings in the Sustainable Production, Products and Consumption Unit of the Directorate General for the Environment in the European Commission, and she's already been mentioned, Sorka Edwards, Secretary General of Housing Europe. I'm going to ask our panelists just a couple of questions to provide some context for the conversation we're going to have. And then I'm going to introduce two speakers who are going to present projects to us, projects that really are already contributing to the economy, to society and to the environment. And then they will join the discussion for the second half. Keep your questions coming in. I will put them to the panel as and when they appear. So Kieran, perhaps if I could come to you first, let's set the context before we delve into concrete and this sector in particular. What do you see as the really key challenges that we will need to address to deliver on the Green Deal objectives in this area, in the area of a sustainable built environment? What are the biggest and most difficult challenges?
Well, one of the things that we realize from looking at the prospect of the Green Deal in Europe is that buildings consume 40% of the energy out there and are responsible for 36% of greenhouse gas emissions. In a nutshell, a third of the climate change coming from Europe is coming from buildings. And we know that most of the buildings that are out there today will still be here in 20 or 30 years' time. So we need to renovate them. And that's why we talk a lot about the renovation wave. This is all about taking the existing buildings that we have and bringing them up very simply to an A energy rating. That is good news for the building industry. It's good news for creating jobs, and it's good news for those who are living in poorly heated, poorly constructed buildings. And I think there's enormous economic potential in this. But from my report on the renovation wave, we realized that a lot of people don't know where to go to and don't know how to start in making the renovation wave a reality. And that's why we're saying we need one-stop shops. We need funding to local and municipal councils to help, but putting in place these one-stop shops that will encourage people to renovate their homes is a really good start. Once we have that in place, there's issues around finance, and we need to work with the banks and the other financial institutions to invest in renovation projects. And I'm heartened by what's called the Recovery and Resilience Facility. Essentially, the COVID recovery money, a lot of that will go into renovation. And I think it's the real low-hanging fruit that we can capitalize on in the next few years.
Thank you very much. And as you say, already there in the recovery strategy, seen as central, but the challenge that you point to is how to make it work and really deliver. We will come back to that later on. Josephina Lindblom from the European Commission, a very warm welcome to you as well. From your perspective, is that the key challenge? We've heard already from Kieran and from Sandro, the vast potential that this sector has to contribute to a sustainable built environment, but also to contribute to those wider goals. What do you see as the biggest challenges that they and we face?
Yeah, and of course they have pointed out some really key challenges, but I want to, I don't know if I should say complicate things, or if I should just say broaden the aspects really, because it is really important if we want to be able to achieve our climate neutrality objectives. We have to look at the full life cycle of a building, and that takes into account also, you know, as some of the speakers already said, we need to look at the materials that go into buildings. How are they produced? How are the buildings being designed? What materials are they using? What is their work with shape and deconstruction and I don't know what. The circularity aspect really is important. We see how many very energy efficient buildings, they have to be used for 20, 30, 40 years before the carbon that you put into them from the very beginning actually starts to be paid off. We call this the embodied carbon. So carbon that you have sort of have been emitted because you were constructing your building and you were manufacturing the products. So all this, we need to look at the full life cycle, and we need to take circularity into account. And there, I would say, the key challenges are, we need to have a new understanding of this, whether it is among building professionals, whether it is, you know, policy makers, contracting authorities, the demand side in general. We need new skills, data and policy. And this is an area which is relatively new to us, but we can't put all eggs in one bag, which is the energy efficiency part, and think that nothing else matters, because we're gonna have a waste wave if we don't manage to hold those different thoughts in our heads at the same time. And we need to simplify that process. Let's be fair. Doing a so-called life cycle assessment, we cannot expect that from every project at this point in time, whether it's new build or renovation for that matter. We need to simplify those things. We need to provide tools and methods that can support that process. And I think before I leave now, I think we will need a lot of collaboration between the different actors in the value chain. So I'm probably going to come back to that quite a lot today.
Absolutely. Something I do very much want to come back to, because you're talking about that new understanding, which involves everybody, and emphasizing this holistic approach. All these initiatives, a whole raft of things the EU is doing, the Commission is doing. How do we make sure they all work in the same direction and pull in the same direction, as it were? Lots to come back to in our discussion. But Sorka, complete the picture for us, if you would, in terms of the challenge as you see it that lies ahead.
Thanks a lot, Jackie, and thanks for having me here today, and also for the St. Patrick's Day wishes. Very welcome the green, although I must say I'm actually more missing the black stuff, so the pint of Guinness we won't get.
We should have done this with a glass of Guinness, shouldn't we?
Yes, hopefully next year we'll be able to do that. But yes, I think Koen actually outlined very well what the real challenge is, and it's I think we have to recognize this great achievement, this policy achievement that we see at the moment, in that the discussions that we are having today have actually in a way been taken at the highest possible level. So if we think of two flagship initiatives of the current European Commission, it's the Renovation Wave. Part of that is the Affordable Housing Initiative, where they're looking at livability, how we live together, and the recently launched Bauhaus Initiative, again, how we live together. So we've really been catapulted to the top spheres of EU ambition there. And I think what the challenge is going to be is to bring that down to earth and look and listen to citizens. And that's why I think bringing the societal perspective is so important here, because this is not about a fridge that we stick an energy label on. this is people's homes, sort of the most important thing they have, the factor that gives them, that allows them to have a productive life or not. And so this focus on the societal impact is very welcome. So
And
indeed
just
the
from your,
challenge, yeah.
sorry, no, keep going.
So the challenge indeed is to bring those lofty ambitions that we now have on the table at European level, but then to look at the real concerns that we're hearing back. So indeed the growing inequalities that we see as a result of the pandemic, people who are now energy poverty more on the table as bills are going up because people are spending more time at home, people not having enough space at home to work or for their children to study. So these worries, the genuine worries and growing concerns that people have, and also those financial worries. So how we have an affordable housing issue across Europe at the moment. So obviously the cost of this is going to be crucial. So I think to bring those two different levels together, and I think as Kieran rightly put this, we're going to need a lot of work to build that trust with the consumers. And that's going to be on the financial side, on the governance side, on the outreach side. So yes, this is the real challenge, to bring those ambitions to meet what people's real concerns are on the ground in their homes.
Let me just follow up on that straight away, if I might. To all of you, a question, because you're pointing to some of the detailed challenges that people face in society, in terms of, as you said, it's cost, it's a lot of different factors. But you talked about trust, Sorka. What is the key to building that trust, do you think, and therefore getting consumer buy-in for all of this?
So at a very micro level, it has to be trust in the works that are carried out. So we hear a lot about, for instance, rebound effect, so that the actual performance of a building after renovation, it does not do what it says on the tin. So we need a lot of work to be done to avoid disappointment and avoid risk for the consumer, for those investing in general. And then on a slightly broader case, to build that trust to make sure this is not only about insulation and solar panels, it's also about making the neighborhood a place where you can be proud to live in, a place where you can access green space, access services. So it's delivering at the level of the quality of the energy refurbishment, but making it also turning areas into places where people can be proud to live.
Thank you. And Josephina, same question to you. You talked about that new understanding.
If I would have a better building in the end, all over the place, I have the feeling. At the EU level sometimes, but also in different member states. So there has to be pointing to a clear vision where we are working in something, we all feel that we're working in the same direction. And where I see that member states have done a great job so far in this area, they have basically always put up, governments have appointed different kinds of partnerships, whether it is with building professionals, whether it is with end consumers, so to say, and maybe even together. So bring people together. Again, I come back to that. Share thoughts, ideas, collaborate, and what are the synergies? Because very often we see that the cost and benefit between different actors along the life cycle, who's gaining, who's not gaining. I mean, and that should be a common gain.
Sure. And Kieran, same question to you about consumers, but if I can also broaden this out to the industry side of all this, in terms of positioning, what can building materials, the industry, the concrete sector and so on do to position themselves to make sure that they are ready and to respond? They're already doing a lot of technology out there. What do they need to do?
Look, there's so many challenges in all of this. And when we innovate in something as basic to human needs as a roof over our heads, we need to be very careful that we bring consumers along with us. I don't underestimate the challenge. We're trying to get to carbon neutrality by 2050, and we have to ask ourselves a whole series of questions we never asked before. I remember when I was a kid, Buckminster Fuller asked architects, how much does your building weigh? This was a crazy question back in the early 1970s. But now the kind of questions that Josephina alluded to, life cycle assessment, looking at the embodied energy, the embodied carbon in our materials, we have to ask ourselves all of these questions. And it's one heck of a challenge for the concrete industry. And we need to, but there is a place for all kinds of technological solutions in green cement, in reducing the embodied carbon within cement. And many of the companies out there are doing spectacular research that will give us much lower carbon concrete. But I also think, and I'm trained as an architect and as a planner, I think we need to rethink a little bit about how we plan new buildings. I like to think, it was a comment somebody said to me yesterday, Orla Hegarty, think of the spine or the bones of our buildings perhaps being made of concrete, and maybe every 20 or 30 years we replace the outside skin on them, but we reuse the building frame that's there in the middle. And I see too many buildings that are being knocked down after 20 or 30 years. So I think we do need to put the emphasis on renovation. But even as we design new buildings, we have to think about that as well. So lots of new challenges, but I think lots of scope for innovation, particularly from the concrete sector, in rethinking the materials they use and how to use them wisely.
Well, indeed, and in terms of raising awareness that it is reusable and recyclable, how it can be used, how it can contribute to this circularity you've all underlined is so important. A quick thought, if I could, from Josefina and Sorka on this question of the challenge for industry, for building materials generally, and for concrete, and then I'll bring in our project presenters. Josefina first.
Yeah, regarding the materials, of course, it is the construction sector and the concrete sector is enormously important. I think they are on a good track, because I think what will be really necessary is, as we just heard, it is about knowing your material, having data on your material, whether it's embodied carbon or something else. People will have to know, manufacturers will have to know. And I also think it is about looking at how can your material be recycled and reused, and not just in the future, thinking about deconstruction of the building 50 years ahead, but now, when we are renovating now, for example, how can we take down certain material? How can we avoid that it ends up on landfill? For example, we see lots of buildings now which are being energy renovated and or renovated for energy purposes, and you put the insulation just attached to the concrete. And then when you take that down one day, or even now, because we also take down buildings now which were renovated some years ago, well, you can't separate the two materials, and you can't reuse, it ends up on landfill. So I think thinking about today already, what can we do with our buildings today, and how can we work together between different material producers to make sure that we can assembly, disassembly, etc., and coming back to collaboration. I think that would be really important for the sector.
Absolutely. Sorka, I thought it was interesting your point about knowing your material and having the data. The first question that came in for this session was, what is the embedded carbon per cubic meter of concrete produced and used cradle to cradle? People, this is the key question, and people, you need to have those facts and figures at your disposal. Koen, I may give you a chance to answer that in a moment, but Sorka, your thoughts in terms of the challenge for industry now?
Yes, just 2 points I want to resonate a little bit with Josefina. One, I think on the mixed messages coming through from Europe, I think we need to make sure that there is not a clash. We have national ambitions when it comes to reducing carbon emissions from the building sector. So we have to take care this year in the review of the EU level legislation that it actually adds value. And I think particularly of the minimum energy performance requirements and how that is implemented with the right timescale and the right funding. And then I would really like to say this need for a common mission we also share. So I think the EU really needs to be clear that it shares the mission of having affordable green housing for all, and not to be sort of tinker around the edges, but see how they can work with the key actors to achieve that mission. On the material side, and I think collaboration is key. I would also agree with the speakers on that. What we are bringing together, so there are 46,000 local organizations. We've committed now to refurbish 4 million homes by 2030. I must say this was the pre-COVID forecast. We're evaluating now how that can be brought to reality, but we see excellent partnerships with those housing providers and renovating over 200,000 units a year with the material sector, with the construction sector on the ground. And I would echo the need for more research and more pilots, more living labs, for really testing out the new materials and new research with those willing participants, or those actors that have committed to make this renovation wave happen. Because indeed, we don't know all the answers here. We haven't got the answer 100% right. So we still need the research and the pilots and to generate the right solutions so that we take the risk out of this.
Thank you very much. So we've set there really the challenge. We've set the challenge from a consumer perspective. How do we bring them on board? How do we get them to both trust and accept this and to do it? We've talked about the challenge for the building materials industry. Come back on all of that. But I want at this point just to pause our discussion, if I might, because I want to hear we are talking today about initiatives. Let's hear about some very significant projects that are contributing to addressing some of the challenges that you've been talking about. And we're going to hear two short case studies, just 4 or 5 minutes each time. And then the speakers of those case studies are going to join our panel. So if you have any questions for them, you can put them to them later on. So first, I'm delighted to welcome Thomas Kreitmeier, who is a green buildings expert in the Energy Efficiency Department of the Municipal Department 20 Energy Planning in the city of Vienna. And he's going to talk about buildings as part of the energy system, Viennese showcase projects. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you, Jackie, for your nice introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure to give you a brief overview of the role of buildings within the energy system and Viennese showcase projects today. Next slide. I cannot see my slides. Can you see them?
You can see them in the middle of the screen. You can't see them if you look in the middle of the screen.
Oh, yeah, there they are, of course. Yeah, perfect. I'll jump right in and use this slide to point out the urgency of rethinking building energy supply. Don't let all the numbers confuse you. The flowchart shows where the energy comes from, the conversion steps, and what it's finally used for. What I would like to point out to you is that already more than 1/3 of Vienna's energy consumption and the emissions linked to it is caused by space heating. And if you take into account that buildings also require process heat and electricity, the role of buildings as a player in the energy system becomes even more important. Next slide. As you can see from the climate values of the past 65 years, it is getting hotter. What is seen in the annual energy flow chart today as an increasing electricity demand is that the currently fastest growing energy demand in buildings is for cooling. So next slide. We are no longer just talking about sustainable heating. With the example of a residential complex in the 22nd Viennese district, I'd like to show you what an affordable, climate-friendly energy supply can look like. Here, approximately 160 apartments in an urban context are supplied almost exclusively with renewable energies, which ensures not only high level of supply security, but also a maximum of comfort. An important goal for the project was not to just provide cheap housing, but to provide an affordable living environment. Next slide. The energy concept of this apartment complex basically consists of 4 components. A building with thermal concrete core activation, a geothermal storage underneath the building, heat pumps for heating and cooling, and renewable electricity to power those heat pumps. Now the question of how to heat the buildings when no renewable energy is available comes up repeatedly. And as we can see in the next slide, the answer can be found within the following diagram. It shows that it doesn't matter when the building is heated because it can maintain its temperature for almost a week. Due to the concrete core activation, the whole building becomes a rather sluggish thermal storage, and the heating system can be operated whenever renewable energy is available. Next slide. Yeah, that brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope I've been able to show you with my example and those examples given here in the final slide, which ways Vienna is taking, among others, to provide people with a comfortable, affordable, and climate-friendly energy supply all year round. And yeah, thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Thomas. And we will come back and say any questions for Thomas, you'll have an opportunity to ask them a little bit later on. But let's complete the picture with our second presentation from Finn Pasov, who is Technical Manager, and I'm going to mispronounce this, I fear, Finn, Spencom, which is a manufacturer of concrete elements. And Finn represents the company on Circle House. He's going to tell us a little bit about Circle House, which is a practical application of the circular economy in the construction industry. Finn, great to have you with us, and over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to present this project. Next slide, please. The objective of the Circle House was to demonstrate that you could reuse 90% of the materials without loss of value, and that's both economical and in terms of emission and waste. Today, maybe on a good day, 10% are reused, and then another fraction are recycled. So the goal is really ambitious. Next slide, please. The participants were liable. It was a non-profit social housing association. So this is actually the first, as I know, social housing that will be built with the possibility of dismantling and reuse. It was led by a group of architects, consultants, contractors, and research institutes, and then with the industrial partners, a lot of them, as you can see, representing almost all the value chain in the business. Next slide, please. Okay, and then why to do it? Of course, we all know that concrete structures, they're designed for 50, sometimes 100 years durability, but indoors concrete especially can last much longer. Nobody actually knows how long. And the similar goes for other materials, but I'll stick to the concrete. Many buildings are demolished long before that. And of course, this represents a huge waste of materials. And the fact is that today you could reuse maybe 20 to 25% of the concrete elements. At least you could dismantle them and use them in another building, but it's not done. And one of the reasons are that most of the elements are non-standard geometry. We produce elements maybe 5 on each drawing, so it's a lot of different elements, and they're not practical to use in other buildings. Next slide, please. So with this in mind, there's standard elements as the top priority. It was a goal, and it turned out to be actually possible to design 2 very different buildings. It was a townhouse and a 4-story building using the same elements. Actually, we could produce this, and we could design this using only 5 different elements. All the connections are bolted, and of course some joints are filled with a mortar of some kind, maybe limestone mortar, for fire and sound insulation. Next slide. all the relevant data on the elements are stored centrally, and the elements are casted with an RFID chip so that it has a unique number, so you can access the element data from start with the production data, but also repair and handling instructions, and you can actually access this just from a normal smartphone by scanning the chip. Next slide. The conclusions was actually that if we are going to do this, we will require some standardized elements if we are going to make elements that are worthwhile using. This project took it to the limit. You will need to do something to keep the architectural demands and freedom. So in the long run, maybe 50 to 70% could be standard elements, and then some elements that need to be unique. The traceability is vital to access the conditions of the elements later. Also, we might need some material passport or something else where we can secure these data. But the bottom line is that the technology is there to produce it. It can be done. We're just waiting for the first orders. So next slide. Current status: the demonstrator was built in 2018 as proof of concept. It's still standing in Copenhagen. It's available to see. And the final element, the final social housing, will be built in 22 with some modifications in the design to keep the cost a bit lower than it ended up. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Fascinating stuff, Finn. And as I say, any questions to Finn or Thomas, do please keep them coming. Okay, we identified some of the challenges, both from a consumer perspective and an industry perspective in our discussion. I want to turn now in terms of what does this mean, and what does this mean in terms of policy? We know, of course, the Commission is planning a sustainable built environment strategy. We've already seen some elements of that come through. It's been mentioned by Kieran and Sandro in the Recovery Initiative. So I just wanted to ask each of you what your assessment is of whether the EU, and Sorka, perhaps I could start with you on this one, whether the EU is on the right track in terms of these types of initiatives, and particularly picking up on the point that Josefina made when she talked about coherence and consistency. And I see a question from the audience or a comment saying environmental legislation is evolving says too quickly, and the deadlines for achieving the objectives set at European level are quite short. The owners, even the European institutions, are not ready and are struggling to achieve these goals. So how do we make sure, do you think we're on the right track, and how do we make sure that we have a strategy that is doable, ambitious but doable, and also brings this consistency and coherence to it all? What for you do we need to do?
I see some very positive elements in the approach taken by the Commission. I mentioned earlier the Affordable Housing Initiative, which is one of the interesting points for us as part of the renovation wave. And there, what they do is focus on the district level, which is something we hear a lot from social housing providers. So not to focus exclusively on having optimal performance from each individual home, but to look at how you can improve livability, improve comfort at the level of the home and the district. So this, I think, is part of a very welcome approach. We do have some concerns about the proposals around minimum energy performance standards, and whether or not that will provide an added value, considering the fact that many member states are already pushing ahead with their plans to reduce, so to remove lowest performing buildings from the market. So this, I think, during this year, preparing for the review of the EPBD is going to be crucial. So to make sure EU is indeed adding a value with their approach. And then I think on the investment side, I mean, Kieran has mentioned the recovery and resilience plans. We very much welcome the push that the European Commission is giving to member states to make sure that some of this funding, as far as they can, to make sure that some of this funding is actually used for renovation of buildings at the district level. However, as we know, we have to wait to see what these plans will actually look like, to see if this materializes. We also have to be aware that the eligibility varies widely. While we are seeing significant amounts going into Spain and Portugal, and we're already getting good positive vibes back from there about the usage in the sector, in many member states, they will not receive significant amounts. And there we need to look at additional funding, and also the use of the taxonomy, the green taxonomy, make sure that the green taxonomy is actually aligned with what we can do with existing buildings, and not pushing something that is where we have the financial sector completely unaligned with really the possibilities and the need to maintain affordability. So I think the EU needs to look a little bit again at the financial side. Good work and good signals, but will the finance actually reach the projects? That is another question. It's something we're going to keep monitoring and getting feedback from the ground.
Thank you very much. And Josephina, I don't know whether on that question of financing you want to pick up on that, but can I also ask you, we'll come to some of the detail of the proposals and the renovation wave and the Bauhaus and so on in a moment, but in broad terms, you yourself talked about coherence and consistency, and we have this concern from the audience that we have legislation that's evolving very quickly and the deadlines are very short. But we do have ambitious new climate targets, which require urgent action. So how do we get that balance right? And do you hope that the strategy, the Sustainable Built Environment strategy, will resolve some of this issue of consistency and coherence?
Meanwhile, I put on a green jumper. I hope everybody knows. Yes. I certainly do. I mean, the strategy has been slightly put on hold, so we need to see when it is coming. But my wish certainly is that this strategy can provide a true vision, because what I feel currently, and this is perhaps not something that someone from the Commission should say, but I do feel that different parts of the Commission have their respective initiatives, and they are not always working seamlessly towards one common vision. And I really think we should, because we don't have any time to waste here. So I certainly hope and think that such a strategy could do this.
And on the financing point, because there's also a question from the audience saying financing of this work often involves fairly large sums, which owners themselves do not necessarily have. Shouldn't governments be encouraged to improve their building renovation bonus system? So as part of the renovation wave, how are we, as Sorka said, going to make sure this money actually reaches the projects? And how are we going to make sure that national governments are doing all they can to support the consumers in this process?
I think you're right. We need to make sure that we support the end user, the consumers, but I don't think that we should all look at the end consumer and say, how can we support them because we rely on them? I think public authorities must first set their own standards right. We need to start by using the public procurement, which is 14-15% in the EU. Of our building investments, so to say, whether it's new build or renovation, the public procurers should really step ahead first and do those things. And I believe that if they do it and they demand certain things from whether it's the architects, the building company, the manufacturers of the products, if they start to demand certain things which enhances the possibility of circularity, of whole life carbon and all that stuff, and reduction of carbon emissions generally, these kinds of technologies which will be needed and ways of thinking, they will be cheaper. Yeah. We cannot expect the house owner to start off with this. There are plenty of money, public money, going into these kinds of projects already, and they should be the first one to set the standards right.
Thank you. And Kieran, in the context of the renovation wave, you talked about the funding issue, and you were talking there about municipal councils, but a reaction to this discussion about the financing, if you would, and more broadly, whether you think we are, if you put all these different elements together, all the different initiatives, and we've mentioned also the construction projects regulation we've talked about, we're talking now about the renovation wave, we'll talk in a moment, I hope, about the Bauhaus, lots of things going on. How do we make sure this adds up to a coherent program? And by the way, a comment from the audience on the financing saying you should look at the Italian government initiative Eco Bonus. It seems to be a success for everyone. So there are good examples out there.
Oh, there really are. And there's good examples from the Czech Republic, from Bilbao. All around Europe, there is some really interesting work being done on renovation, and we need to learn from that. At a European Union level, you know, Josefina is right. Green public procurement has a hugely important role to play. But as legislators, we want to ensure that we join up our actions on what's called the Fit for 55 or maybe 60, Fit for 1.5 degrees of warming package. So we need to revise the Energy Efficiency Directive, the Renewable Energy Directive, and indeed the Energy Performance of Buildings directives, keeping a strong eye on the circular economy strategy. So we do need to join all these strands of legislation together. What are the implications of this for the concrete, for the building industry? I would say concrete is a valuable resource and we need to use it wisely. It does have an important role to play, but we have to focus on decarbonization. Life cycle assessment is a huge part of that. And I know we're going to talk about the new European Bauhaus. I think the new European Bauhaus will help us with the innovation and changes that we need to meet this challenge.
So a life cycle assessment approach, because one of the things I want to ask you, but you're really already all answering it, is you don't give preference to some materials over others. You take a life cycle approach, you keep materially neutral, as it were.
Yeah, you take a cradle to cradle assessment. Yeah. In the same way as in transport, we talk about well to wheel. So don't just look in isolation at one aspect of the challenge, look at the very broad issues. And that will bring in issues like fire safety. It'll bring in issues like where do you procure the materials you're using, how much transport there is on them. Yeah. In some cases, you know, cross-laminated timber will come out of it very well. In other cases, concrete will be the winner.
And that's the way to do it. Thomas and Finn, if I could ask you, in terms of supporting the work you're doing in your city, Thomas, what do you, when you look at this raft of EU initiatives, how do you see, do you believe the EU is on the right track? And what more support do you want as a city from the European level in order to achieve your objectives? What do you want from Josefina, from Kieran, from Sandro?
Yeah, for me, I think I'd say EU is on the right way, but the incentives should be a little tougher. That we really want to achieve those goals, because there are several ways to find workarounds not to fit those goals we are obliged to reach. So maybe stricter regulation would be necessary. Stricter guidelines would be needed to show that it's really important to go for these goals.
And you raise that key question of how do we foster the take up? We know that the industry is doing a lot, and Koen mentioned it at the beginning, a lot in terms of breakthrough technologies. We've heard, you know, we're hearing all the time about some of the projects, the investments that are being made by the sector in all of this. But how do we then incentivize the take up of those materials that have been developed? Finn, a thought from you, and then I'll come back to Soka perhaps on that. Finn.
Yeah, well, it is actually a very good question, and it is a a difficult question because the construction business industry is extremely conservative. But if you support it by making the life cycle analysis very clear and very keeping it to the cradle to cradle sort, then it would support us a lot. And I really agree with Kian that it's very important that we don't make this a fight between which materials we should use, because materials have different properties and different values, and we should use them in the right way.
Sorka, a thought from you in terms of incentivizing architects and incentivizing what Finn just called a rather conservative construction sector to embrace the low carbon building materials, the low carbon concrete that is being developed. What do we need to do? What works best, do you think?
Yeah, I think what we see in this sector, as I mentioned, many of those large housing providers, and I think it's a good ground for much experimentation and building of that confidence. Because while on one side there is some frustration because the housing provider might feel, okay, now we are dealing with energy efficiency challenges, and now we're also have to look at the circular economy and the life cycle analysis challenge. So for part of the sector, there's a source of frustration, but for others, we really see them pushing ahead. And I think the example given from Denmark was a social housing provider who is pushing ahead with that. And we also see front runners, for example, the Super Local project in the Netherlands, which is implementing a completely circular approach together with the region. And I think what the success was there was to again to put it in the societal frame, as we are doing today in this the title of this session today. So they really worked, the social housing provider worked together with the region to show how it can add value to the region, bring back jobs to the region, use potentially local materials, generate local jobs. So I think this again is going to be the crucial one, how you can put it in a larger societal frame. So the construction sector, together with those limited profit housing providers in many cases that are very strong with the local authority. I think that's going to be, from what I can see, it's going to be one of the keys. So this partnership.
Kieran and Josefina, a thought on this, if you would. There's a lot of questions about performance-based approaches I'd like to come to after that. But Kieran, your thoughts in terms of incentives to get the sector to take advantage of these breakthrough technologies?
Really good question. I think we need to stimulate innovation. And I've seen some interesting work happening around the world on carbon capture by concrete, the Carbon X Prize in the US. I think UCLA was doing well on that front. So stimulating innovation, I think, is at the heart of what we do. I would come back to green public procurement, but then in my day-to-day work, I think we do need to look for minimum energy performance standards. If that's done carefully, I think it will really lead to investment in the sector, in refurbishment, in renovation, and that could be hugely useful. But there is big variation from country to country, and I do think we have to be mindful of the different challenges in each member state within the European Union.
Absolutely. And I saw you smiling wryly, Josefina, when Thomas said, maybe the incentives have to be a little tougher, is how he put it. What for you is the key here? What sort of incentives will really work, do you think?
Well, I mean, we can already see some good examples in a number of member states where they are going down this path on a national level, not just on different city level, which is already a very good start, of course. But we see how some member states are really starting to include life cycle thinking into their building regulations. And they do that step by step. They don't come bam with an enormous target starting as of tomorrow, but they start by setting a requirement of assessing and reporting of, let's say, for example, the whole life carbon, as we call it, the carbon emissions throughout the whole life cycle of a building. you have to report on that from the beginning. There's no target, but you have to report. And then they set up some kind of a stepwise ladder approach, so that we know then that in 3 years' time, they're going to start to put in a certain value limit, a minimum value. And then they show that stepwise approach, and they have it clear by 2030, so that the sector already knows where they have to be now by 2030, for example. And this works very well. Even if the target isn't there yet, the sector starts to move, and they see that very clearly.
So a number of questions, as I mentioned, about the performance-based approach. One, on recycled content in cement and concrete, standards currently prescribe recipes to the single market. Do you see product performance-based approach as a solution to get concrete with greater recycled content to the market and shift demand to lower impact products? Somebody else says a performance-based approach to concrete specification is already possible. What is missing in a number of cases is the large availability of recycled materials, for example, recycled aggregates. And an LCA assessment of these products shows they're not always green solutions. A number of them more. When will EN 206 move to performance approach as opposed to minimum cement requirements and efficiency factors that penalize using separately added pozzolans? And I'm probably mispronouncing that. And more and more, they keep coming on this performance-based approach. I just wondered, anyone want to react to that? And also Koen, I see Koen is still listening in with us. If you wanted to react, Koen, you'd be very welcome to, please.
Well, I think just a few high-level points on this one, and I see the questions coming in, but standardization will be an important part of the whole equation when it comes to sustainable products policy. And I think it is mentioned as one of the pull policies to get low carbon products to the markets. I mean, you have push policies, which basically look at the upstream manufacturing and how we can bring low carbon products through technology improvements in the manufacturing. But pull policies are indeed standardization, public procurement, financing, which was discussed as well. That's one point. The second point is indeed sustainability and recycled aggregates. Let me take 2 points on that. Construction and demolition waste in Europe. The recycling of construction demolition waste, the levels are still very low. And I think that's one of the key elements in policy, is that we need to increase the recycling of construction materials going forward. And make sustainable use of it. Sustainability has 3 pillars: economic, social, and environmental. It's not always the best solution to use your recycled concrete for recycled aggregates if you have to transport them for 100 kilometers instead of using them here as road base. Maybe a road-based solution is the most sustainable option. So we need to look at how to use recycled aggregates and whether recycled aggregates can be used for new concrete. That's another point I would like to make. And I think that's the financing point is the last point, and I would like to side a little bit with Sorcha on that. I think it's a huge challenge if you draw it to your individual situation. Even if you have a house that needs to be completely refurbished and to be stripped down completely before being renovated, because that's how you get the energy efficiency and CO2 efficiency, how are we going to accompany individual households to move out of their houses for 1, 2, 3 months? And to basically then also finance that complete renovation to make it more energy efficient. I mean, it's a challenge for member states, but it's a challenge for the EU as well, I would say. So I will stop there, Jackie.
Absolutely. Thank you, Koen. And somebody, indeed, a question and a comment to Sorcha. Someone says, at the end, it will be all about the money. Actually, the worst houses are occupied by people that don't have enough money to look for something different or to renovate. So just picking up on that point there that you made, Koen. On that, please, and if you have a comment to the performance-based approach questions that are coming in floods. Sorcha.
Yeah, I think on the financial question, which it's again how we frame it, because indeed the upfront costs are high, but as we know that the payback, it's very rarely seen directly on the entity that makes the investment, but the payback on a bigger societal scale, there's massive spin-off effects in the local economy and the larger economy. There are spin-off effects in impacting energy poverty, for instance. So I think the case just has to be made for a higher level of grants and for looking at this not as free money, but looking at this as not as debt, not as unfair state aid, but really looking at this as investment in people, investment in the society. And it's the only way we're going to make sure we have the right financial flows into this investment. So there's a need for change.
If I might, Soccer, there's also another question from someone, which really I think is for you, and then I'll come back to the others, I promise. How do we manage the challenge of achieving housing additionality when renovating older public housing complexes? The choice of demolish or rebuild, or renovate and add on? How do we answer that one?
Yeah, it's a real one, and I know this is a slightly old example in a way, but following the reunification of Germany, there was extensive evaluation work on the existing buildings through a competence center that was established to actually make those decisions, because it has to be taken on a block by block, district by district level. Based on indeed the cost optimal solution in terms of greenhouse gas emissions and livability. So we have really good experience on that coming through from that specific example, and quite a few of and how they determined whether it was worth keeping the building or whether the investment would be paid off. And we saw also a lot of new developments of the building, so reducing the number, sort of redesigning the area, bringing in services, perhaps adapting the number of housing depending on need. Okay. So I think it's really a case by case question.
But Jackie, if I could come in very briefly there. Every year there's the awarding of the Pritzker Prize for Architecture, and yesterday a French couple, Anne Lacaton and Jean-Philippe Vassal, won it, and much of their work focuses on the refurbishment of public housing. And I think one of the reasons they won the award is that they make much more use of existing buildings rather than constantly wanting to build new ones. And I think that's quite a strong statement from the jury there. And I think we'll see more focus on existing neighborhoods and refurbishing them rather than demolish and rebuild over the years ahead.
Thank you very much.
Just to say, I would agree with Kieran there. I mean, we're seeing huge added value of maintaining districts, respecting also the heritage of the area. But it is true that sometimes we do hear of cases where demolition has to be considered as well. And there, of course, we have to look at improving the reuse of those materials in line with Josefina's strategy there.
Thank you. Josephine, I don't know whether you can comment at all to all the questions relating to performance-based approaches and what's missing and so on. And then Thomas, there are a couple of energy questions I'd like to come back to you and also to Finn on. Josephina first, on performance-based approaches.
Yeah, I think the performance is really the way we should go. We should be material neutral in the way we are looking at sustainability and circularity, for that matter. That is how we're going to gain the most. And I think that's also how we can get everybody involved and really focus on the same objective, so to say. You said something about someone saying it's not always green to recycle. No, of course not. It's true. But in most cases it is. But it will be on a case by case. It can also be like a very interesting study in France showed. They looked at some, I think around 10 typologies, standard buildings that they wanted to renovate, which they have throughout the country. And instead of expecting each renovation project to do their own individual life cycle assessment, they did a study where they looked at typical renovation projects and saw what would be the key things to take into account to reduce carbon emissions from this standard kind of renovation project. See what I mean? So that there are many ways also that member states can support different kinds of projects without going into each and one of them individually. And I think that will be really important. I think the vision that we're all speaking about, the vision should contain many different aspects. But can I just say that in the renovation wave, there is an action, which is to set out, the Commission will set out a roadmap for the reduction of whole life carbon up to 2050. And that is something that we will be doing together, different DGs working on this together. We will base this partly on the framework levels, which is a framework with a set of core indicators to assess the sustainability of buildings, including whole life carbon. But we will also look into other kinds of policy initiatives which are feeding into that stream. So with that roadmap, we believe we will provide a part of that vision. And I think, yeah, this is something that we will be working very hard on in the next coming years, but the vision is needed. And we also need consistent demand of such buildings, including consistent demand then of secondary materials, for example. And how do we get that? Well, I think by regulation, by legislation. We cannot just expect people to sit in their homes and think, oh, that would be nice. We have to set out legislation in this regard and, of course, provide financing for it. I don't hear you, Jackie.
You're quite right. I muted because I had to type something and I didn't want you all to hear the clatter of keys. Apologies. I wanted to come to Finn on a couple of questions relating to climate resilience and then a couple to Thomas on district heating and a specific question to your presentation. But Finn, the questioner says, regarding climate resilience, concrete works well for thermal storage in current conditions, but with temperatures rising over the coming decades, how effectively can concrete structures react and adapt to climate change and continue to maintain thermal comfort for housing other uses? And again, repeat question about how do we make buildings more climate resilient? This is an absolutely central issue. Your reaction to that, then I'll come to Thomas.
Okay, there's as I see, there's two questions in this. There's both how how can the concrete contribute to thermal distribution or to heating and cooling of buildings. And actually, when we're talking thermal-active houses, most of the energy we put into them are put into cooling the houses. So I think with the rising temperatures, this benefit will be larger and larger and not smaller. Yeah, so that was one of them. The other was the resilience to the climate.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think that these fairly small temperature increases will have a very big impact on the concrete. Of course, as it is today, the concrete are very suspected. It can be damaged by thaw and frost where you go below and above these 0 degrees. And of course, if you have generally a higher temperature and not that many days with high frost, then this could actually benefit the concrete because we don't have this going to below the 0.
Thank you. Thomas, a couple of questions for you. To what extent does Vienna stimulate the uptake of building integrated photovoltaics? And what about district heating? Larger scale solutions might offer, depending on the location, an efficient way to decarbonize heating for many homes and buildings. Perhaps you could react on those 2 points. And if you want to pick up on the question about climate resilience and thermal storage as well.
Let me briefly say that I'm a big fan of the architects' work of Lacadon Vassal mentioned before, because they not only make use of the best use of the existing resources, but also because they bring old buildings into the present and prepare them for the future through rather simple and useful measures. I'm a big fan of this work. Vienna has big goals in terms of using photovoltaics to cover the Viennese energy demand. Vienna is now trying to implement a total of 800 megawatts of photovoltaic power plants into our energy systems by 2030, and we have this fundings for photovoltaics and for solar electricity storage in order to set to give incentives to use photovoltaics.
Okay.
And the question about District heating, I already forgot, I'm sorry.
So, and I've deleted it, having asked you it, so let me go back and try and find it again for you. Hang on a second. I'm not sure if it will do it. Hang on, I will. Yes, large-scale solutions might offer, depending on the location, an efficient way to decarbonize heating for many homes and buildings. So how do you see the role of district heating here?
Yeah, district heating is definitely the answer for our energy questions of the more central city of the future. So we are now trying to get rid of fossil fuels and to connect those buildings within the central city to district heating. But of course, we cannot build district heating throughout the whole city. So
it's part of the answer, but can't be the whole answer.
Yeah.
Okay, just wanted to come to the question of the Bauhaus, because I do want to touch on it before we finish. And then I'm going to ask you all for a key priority for the future. And I would like to also give Sandro an opportunity right at the end, if he wants to react to everything that's been said. But on the question of the European Bauhaus, I must confess, when I first heard about this in the speech, I thought, what on earth is that? Just thoughts, if you would, brief ones on what difference can it make? Do you think it can make a significant contribution? What do you hope will be the outcome of this process? Josefina, how does it fit into the picture we're talking about? Because we're talking about societal acceptance, and it's all about the places we live, which is where we started this conversation.
Yeah, I think it can fit in very well, provided that the Commission is able to really build on what we are now. I mean, we are currently in what we call a design phase. So we have opened up to society, to citizens, to come with all kinds of ideas which they believe are important and which they think will sort of improve the built environment. And so I think that is a great idea. We know for a fact that there are lots of people, lots and lots of citizens and organizations which are getting involved, starting the discussion, the conversation, and feeding back to us. So that is really important. Now, how can we take that forward? How can we fit that into the different, do we need policy initiatives, or is it rather actually something which is about happening more on the ground than the European Commission coming up with things? I think it's going to be all kinds of different things that come out of this. And we will have a role, I think, but not the full role to get it into practice.
Thank you. Kieran, could it make a big difference, do you think, this initiative? What do you hope for from it? Are you a fan of the idea?
Oh, absolutely. But I'm terribly biased. My father studied under Walter Gropius, who was one of the main figures in the Bauhaus some 80 years ago. But look, I think we do need to embrace new solutions in design and innovation. And I think by encouraging designers, architects, engineers to think beyond the conventional, we'll see extraordinary solutions that we're not currently contemplating. And I thought it was so refreshing to see the Commission President Ursula von der Leyen talk about a new European Bauhaus. But times have changed. 100 years ago or 80 years ago, we focused on modernity, on no limits, on the white heat of technological progress. I think today in 2021, we're somewhat humbled by the limits that are set to us by the planet, by the limits, the environmental and social limits that constrain us. And I think by working within that, using design expertise, we will find many of the solutions that we need to keep the temperature of the planet to a sustainable level. And I am really enthused about this. And I think we will discover a lot over the next couple of years on what can be achieved.
Thank you very much indeed. Sorka, a quick thought on the Bauhaus, if you would.
Very quick, yes, I very much welcome. I think it's a new approach, a new way of working we're seeing from EU level. And I think some of the original values that come through from the original Bauhaus, so this idea of design to solve social challenges, make quality accessible for for the many and not the few. I think they're very much in line with what we've been working for 30 years within Housing Europe. And if we remind ourselves on what those, so how can we adapt this design to solve our current social challenges? So again, it's the climate. It's the climate threat that Kieran mentioned. It's also growing social inequalities, which have been, which are really highlighted by this pandemic. So I think if we can really use this philosophy, so use the Bauhaus, bring in this idea of using it to help solve those societal challenges, and keep those objectives in mind, so that we don't get too hung up on the process itself, because we're hearing a lot about the process, but look at what are the objectives? What do we want to solve by this? I'm excited about it.
Presumably citizens need to be part of that conversation as well. When we co-create, yes, of course, it's the designers, the people who come up with the solutions, but what do they want? What will make future living spaces acceptable for them? All part of that societal aspect, if we are to respond to their needs. We are almost out of time, and as I say, before we close, I'm going to come back to Sandra, but before I do that, I want to ask each of you in a sentence, of all the issues we've talked about for the last hour and a half, if each of you had to identify, and I'm not going to say necessarily one priority, because you've all said it's holistic, there are many elements that have to come together, but a key next step, if we are really to ensure that we're on the right track to build a sustainable built environment, but also bring the citizens along, so that societal aspect, what for each of you is the key next step? Thomas first.
My point of view, as mentioned before, there needs to be clear political commitment to the energy revolution. It needs clear and strict guidelines that make it possible to overcome dependencies on fossil fuels. And as also mentioned before, incentives must be created to use resources more efficiently. By this, I mean that there needs to be special focus on the refurbishment of existing buildings.
Thank you. Finn.
Yeah, I think the 2 points are really, really important. One is that we have some very clear rules on how to assess the emission and the sustainability of a building, clear and fair rules going from cradle to cradle. And then also to support the building industry, as I said, it is very conservative. So I think we should have some focus on full-scale demonstration projects involving both design for disassembly and also material interactions and hybrid solutions and so on. And I think this could actually be supported projects or public buildings.
Thank you very much indeed. Soka, Josefina, and I'll give the last word to Kieran before we close the panel, and I hand back to Sandro, but Soka first.
I've seen really inspiring examples of citizens' assemblies at local level, asking local people for their solutions and their proposals on how to tackle the challenge. And I think I will finish on that point. I think that is really, it's going to be really part of the track we need to take. So
thank you very much. Josefina.
I come back to what I started off with, collaboration. I think whether it is within the sector, between policymakers at different levels or different areas, and also citizens, collaboration in those within those different groups and between them, I think that's going to be key. And I can only also repeat what we've said before, and which Finn brought up again, to simplify the assessment along the life cycle of a building, to really get all projects taking grabbing the big potential that there is to improve them, each and one of them, but not making that too complicated. That would be the main way forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Kieran, last thought from you.
Yeah, well, look, I think we need a bottom-up approach as much as we need legislation coming from Europe. I think we should constantly ask ourselves, are we focused on the social and environmental challenges that society has? And if we do contemplate those questions in what we build, where we build, how we build, then we can head in the right direction.
Thank you very much. And panel, the audience can't thank you in this online world. So let me do it on their behalf. Thank you for a great discussion. I wish we had even longer. We could have delved into more detail on some of these issues, but thank you so much to all of you. And thank you to Thomas and Finn for your fascinating presentations on the projects. Thank you, Kieran, Josephina, and Soka. Enjoy the rest of Paddy's Day. So thank you to you. We are almost at the end of our time today, but we started by hearing from Sandro Gozzi, our host today, and I've already thanked you, Sandro, for the contribution that you've made to helping to bring this event together. I just wondered if you had any final brief thoughts, reflections on what you've heard today.
Well, yes, but first of all, it has been a terrific discussion. Thank you very much. We talked a lot of green in St. Patrick's Day. Next time, we'll make sure that we also bring the black that Soka has evoked. So don't worry. I mean, we will improve also on this. I would say that I will retain some key points. Legal certainty for the sector, ambitious policy targets, technological innovation, provide adequate involvement and information of the citizens, especially on sustainable products, which is very important, adequate financial incentive, and an effort to rethink both our sustainable cities and our single market, which has to become much more sustainable. I would say that this would be, in my view, the golden thread, which links all the different interventions. So, and again, thank you very much for this initiative. Thank you very much for asking me to be your host. And let's continue, because there is a lot of work ahead of us.
Absolutely, and thank you so much again. And it only remains for me to thank all of you for joining us for this conversation. Thank you for all your questions and comments. Managed to squeeze a lot of them in, not all of them, but there were a huge number, but it's great to have heard from you. So thank you very much. Thank you again to our panel, to Sandro, to the Concrete Initiative, to the Parliament Magazine for organising this event. And it only remains for me to wish you a very pleasant rest of the day, and do stay safe.